Today's first reading begins with the words, "All the heads of the priesthood and the people too added infidelity to infidelity, copying all the shameful practices of the nations and defiling the temple that the Lord had consecrated for himself." In the 6th century BC, like many times before and many times after, the people of Israel, the people of God, us, including the priests, have chosen to follow the world and its ways instead of following God and his commandments. So rather than God's people being a sign of contradiction to the world, we've instead followed in the ways of the world and thus defiled God's house. Brothers and sisters, there is an old saying, "As the church goes, so goes the world." That's the way it's supposed to be. The church leading the world in goodness, not the world leading the church in evil. When the church is following Christ, the world is on a good footing. When the church is going off the rails following worldly ways, what chance does the world have of being at peace, let alone being redeemed? A similar theme was presented by Pope John Paul II when he visited Perth in November 1986. During his homily on the first Sunday of Advent, he said, "The family is the domestic church." Having outlined the direct link between the family and the church, he then explains how the state of the family then affects the state of the world when he says, "In its own way, the family is a living image and historical representation of the mystery of the church. The future of the world and of the church, therefore, passes through the family." Here he clearly links the future of the church and thus the world to the state of the family. Finally, he notes, "As the family goes, so goes the nation, and so goes the whole world in which we live." Effectively, he was restating that old saying, but adding an extra layer. As the family goes, so goes the church, so goes the world. I think anyone with eyes to see and ears to hear is well aware that both the church and the world are in dire straits. Clearly, this would then suggest, given that the state of the church and the world are dependent on our families, that our families must also be in the same dire straits. I'm not sure that many of those listening to this homily would argue against that. As you know, brothers and sisters, I'm also a prison chaplain and spend 2 days a week there visiting inmates. A history of family brokenness is a common theme that I come across. Seldom do I meet an incarcerated man who's come from a stable, happy, traditional family. Absent fathers is almost a given. Close behind this is absent mothers, not so much physically absent as spiritually or emotionally absent. Many of the men come from broken relationships themselves, having children with multiple mothers, with the corresponding mental health impacts that come with being so divided. Over the last 50 to 60 years, in the name of freedom to do what you want when you want, the world has been, piece by piece, dismantling the traditional Christian family. The very family is designed by God for our spiritual, mental, and physical well-being. This dismantling of the family has impacted both the church and, of course, in turn, the world. When John Paul II gave that homily in 1986, in a sense it was a prophetic statement of what was yet to come in our day and age. So, brothers and sisters, just as the family is being dismantled, so too is the church, both from within and without. The world may very well celebrate the demise of the church, but if we look again at the words of the first reading, we'll see that the fall of the church has very real implications for the world. If the author of 2 Chronicles were here today, he may very well end up writing the same words of the Catholic Church and the world that we now live in. The Lord, the God of their ancestors, tirelessly sent them messenger after messenger, since he wished to spare his people and his house. But they ridiculed the messengers of God. They despised his words. They laughed at his prophets, until at last the wrath of the Lord rose so high against his people that there was no further remedy. As the church goes, so goes the world. With so many cracks already evident in society, it is obvious that the edifice of Western civilization is crumbling before our eyes. While they may very well glory in the destruction of the church, civilization which currently sustains their obstinance is following close behind, soon to vanish again for an appointed time. In a sense, those living in eastern Ukraine or Gaza are already experiencing it. But it's only a matter of time before this collapse spreads, as it has so many times in human history, to the rest of humanity. But brothers and sisters, all is not lost, for there will always be a remnant of the faithful who will keep the flame of the faith burning, and one day will return, as the remnant did under King Cyrus, to rebuild God's house, the church, and to rebuild a just and equitable society. A society where God's commandments are honoured and respected. A society where the traditional Christian family once more reigns. And with the solid family as its base will come a solid church and a solid world once more.